Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sego ani buju indio wachaya kwe kwe. As the mayor of the city of Kingston, these words in the spirit of this gathering. Let's bring our good minds and hearts together as one to honor and celebrate these traditional lands as a gathering place of the original peoples and their ancestors who were entrusted to care for Mother Earth since time immemorial. It is with deep humility that we acknowledge and offer our gratitude for their contributions to this community, having respect for all as we share this space now and walk side by side into the future. So with that, we will officially call this council meeting to order. Mr. Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Mayor Patterson, we have quorum.
Okay, we have nothing under Committee of the Whole closed meeting. Approval of the adits, we do have the withdrawal of a delegation and an amendment to clause 3 of report number 29. Can I have a mover for the adits, please? Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on. Are there any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to pull it up. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm Mayor Rita Holland of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston. Declare my pecuniary interests in the, on report number 28, clause number 2, Queen's University main campus, as I'm employed by Queen's University.
Are there any other disclosures of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on. We have no presentations, but we do have what will be 2 delegations this evening. So first, I'll invite James Allen, Chair of the Kingston Taxi Commission, who will appear before Council to speak to Clause 2 of Report Number 29, received from the Chief Administrative Officer with respect to the Taxi Commission and Rideshare Regulation Harmonization. So just a reminder to our delegations that you have 5 minutes, at which time we'll open up the floor to questions from Council. Mr. Allen, you have the floor. Mr. Allen, I believe you're on mute. You can just unmute yourself.
How's that? Okay, sorry for that. Mr. Mayor and members of council, thank you for the opportunity for me to address council about the taxi business. The Taxi Commission regulates the taxi companies in Kingston and Loyalist, and it deems its main objective is to ensure safety and fairness for the customers and drivers. Customers expect to be safe and they expect to be treated fairly when using a taxi. Ride sharing has been operating in Kingston for the past several years, and customers deserve the same assurances that they are safe when they use ride sharing companies. The Commission attempted to regulate the ride sharing business in 2016 through the implementation of bylaws. Unfortunately, it failed due to the fact that the provincial statute that was created that allowed us to create the Kingston Taxi Commission would not allow us to extend our authority to cover ride shares. So that put us in a bit of a dilemma. The Commission has since charged 7 Uber drivers with illegal operation of a taxi cab. And those charges are currently before the courts. The reality is that ride share services are going to continue to exist. They're not going to go away. As in other municipalities, effective and efficient regulations need to be implemented for our municipality, to ensure that ride share services are safe and fair for the customers that they serve. Our local cab drivers are concerned about Uber drivers flooding the area from the GTA, Toronto, Ottawa, and primarily inundating the weekend business that taxi drivers normally enjoy. This activity is expected to increase once the pandemic is resolved. Rideshare services desperately need to be regulated similar to the Kingston taxis are. The Commission is interested in seeing both taxis and rideshare services regulated in a similar and consistent regulatory framework. We require cooperation and coordination with the city to ensure that this is implemented. After all, fairness in the industry is a must. Other municipalities have successfully implemented regulations for ride shares. Ottawa is one of them that we've dealt with when bringing this motion to council. The commission is eager to work with the city and the community to resolve this situation. And I'm open to any questions at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Allen. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Neal.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I'll have this question for the city solicitor later as well, but it's my understanding that the taxi commission under a provincial piece of legislation, unless that's changed, in fact, are the governing body and not council. Is that still accurate?
Yes, it is. It was brought into legislation by the provincial government back in the late 80s, and it's been in place since that time. So our focus is primarily taxis. Obviously, when that legislation was written, we didn't consider anything other than a taxi cab to cover that legislation. So now ride shares are there, and they've changed the equation immensely.
Okay, so so would you foresee yourself or the commission being the appropriate body to ensure the safety, full insurance, other issues of rideshare?
Well, the taxi commission, in conjunction with City of Kingston and Loyalists, would put their heads together and come up with an equation that would best suit the needs of the municipalities and the taxi drivers and the Uber or rideshare companies. We don't want to reinvent the wheel here. We just want fairness within the industry so that the taxi people and the rideshare people are following the same set of rules. Currently, the taxi individuals pay a lot of taxes. They pay fees, they pay maintenance, they pay a variety of things that is currently not being shared by the rideshare community. Actually, we don't know what they do in relation to their operation, other than we know they're out there. Despite the fact they say they don't operate in Kingston, they have been operating in Kingston for several years.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from council? Councillor Chappell.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. My question is really related to what's been happening in other jurisdictions across the province. Has the Taxi Commission investigated how other jurisdictions are dealing with the ride sharing program? I understand some communities actually receive a contribution from the ride sharing and information about, and that money is utilized for various such as driver safety programs and other joint projects. Have you had any conversations with Uber or any other ride sharing program for that matter?
Yes, I have reached out to a couple of individuals within the Uber company, and I've spoken to them about our intentions in moving forward with some sort of regulatory motion. The problem is that we cannot tell Uber or Lyft or a similar company how to operate because there is no regulation in effect. So they operate at their own pleasure. We've contacted, or I personally have contacted Ottawa, London, City of Barrie to ask how Uber is operating within their communities. And they all operate in a different manner in the fact that they have the authority of the municipality and the bylaws the municipality can generate to regulate them. In our situation in Kingston, which is very unique, there's only one other municipality, the City of North Bay, that operates the same way we do. We have basically carte blanche to issue legislation, or I should say bylaws, in relation to the taxi community. No other community has that situation other than North Bay. But we seem to be the only ones that are having some difficulty. And the difficulty has been going on for a long time. Like it was mentioned that we did initiate a bylaw, and that bylaw was shot down, to speak bluntly, because of our jurisdictional issues. And I've approached our MPP to specifically get some amendments to that legislation. Unfortunately, I'm in a position where if I make too much noise with that particular process, the province may decide just to stop us from operating in total, which would bring us back to square one and put it all on the city's lap as it is right now. So if the city buys into what we're trying to do, and we buy into what we're trying to do, and Uber agrees to these conditions, we'll all be at a happy medium and we'll all be able to function and operate without looking over your shoulder whether or not the Uber is operating without paying their fair share. And it's all about fairness within this industry. The taxi people have been paying and paying and paying year in and year out. And Uber drivers come into town and they collect all the business while the taxi people are left spinning their wheels. That's not fair. And that's one of my main purposes for suggesting that something be done on this is to bring fairness within the industry. Safety is always a concern. Whether or not Uber implements a variety of different issues like they say, that is good. I'm all for safety. We'll at least, once there's a bylaw in place that would regulate them by the municipality, now we can start verifying that they're doing what they're saying they're doing, and identify who their drivers are and how many are operating at any given time. The city of Kingston and Loyalist have about, well, under 100 drivers at this point in time, probably a lot less with COVID right now. But when there's so many putting or parking their taxi because they can't make any money with COVID, it seems a shame that the rideshare community can come in and scoop up what's left without having to pay a cent. So we want to regulate that. We want to change.
Well, thank you for clarifying. From what I read with the report and what you're telling me, it sounds like you're looking for that balance. You're looking for an opportunity to continue with the commission to provide safe and practical taxi services in Kingston, but also bring forward some regulations to ensure that there's also safety managed through the municipality with Uber. And that sounds like a winning combination of some sort to me. So I really appreciate your presentation this evening. Thank you very much. I just, on my final closing comment is I did notice that you finally have some social media presence. So good on you. I saw that you have a Facebook page and things look like you're getting ready to compete in the market rather than just being a passive waiting for the call for a fare. So I congratulate you on that. That sounds great.
We put a lot of effort into this last appointment committee. And it's obviously starting to reap some rewards when people are noticing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next for questions. Next is Councillor Hutchison.
My question was asked and answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Although you didn't see me on camera until recently, I actually had the YouTube going while I got dressed so I could hear the conversation. My question is sort of a high level one, because you're the chair of the Taxi Commission, you have front row seat for this. It seems to me that City Council and Taxi Commission are kind of in the same boat, as in we both would like perhaps to see regulation, but we're both sort of subordinate to the provincial government. So, and what would be ideal, I think, is for the provincial government to take on the regulation. So something you said in your last answer is about if Uber is willing, you said if we're willing and the city's willing, if Uber is willing, then we have the makings of a deal. But it doesn't seem to me that Uber is going to be willing, and not from the communications I've received. So what leverage do we have to bring Uber into this regulation framework?
Well, I've been dealing with Uber for the last 6 months, two individuals that are highly placed within Uber. And from discussions with them, they were basically suggesting or stating that they would not deal with the taxi commission because of the fact that we didn't have jurisdiction. We also had issues with City Hall, and I'll be blunt, City Hall also took the approach at that time that we did have jurisdiction. So we were caught in a catch-22. We either had authority or we didn't have authority, and we needed to come to some consensus so that we could move forward. And I've spoken to Uber through their individuals, and they've identified and stated that they are more than willing to operate as council directs through bylaw, but they have to be the ones initiating the bylaw. They would be more than willing to operate, or I suggested that we would at least like to have the same standards and applications that the City of Ottawa has on Uber. And on speaking with the bylaw team in Ottawa, they've been providing rave reports on how they're cooperating and getting things done. They can regulate the number of drivers at any one time. They know who they are. It makes for a level playing field, and that's all the Taxi Commission has ever asked, is for a level, safe playing field.
Okay, so my follow-up would be then, it seems like your answer was that the leverage would be the bylaws coming from the City of Kingston.
Exactly.
Is there no other leverage that we have to, like, that's a pretty big stick. That's forcing them by bylaw if they're operating in the City of Kingston to abide by the City of Kingston bylaws. But is there any other way we can get them to agree to a regulatory framework? Because otherwise we're basically imposing on them unilaterally.
Well, unfortunately, imposing on them is not what the term I would use. The situation is they're operating within our municipality. They're operating without any means of licensing. We don't know who they are. We don't know who their drivers are. We don't know whether they have insurance. We don't know if they've had police background checks, other than what Uber is providing us. This way, through bylaw, we'll force them to come to the table, because like any other municipality in Ontario that regulates Uber, it's all through a bylaw regulating rideshare industries. So in order for us to get any control over Uber, we first have to implement the first punch. And the first punch is going to allow Uber and the city and the taxi commission to all come together and draw out a plan that's going to be equitable for everyone and fair for everyone. And that's, like I said, I hate to be a broken record, but that's what this is all about. This is why the taxi commission has approached the city in the first place, because it's not being fair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Al.
Thank you.
With that, we will go to our second and final delegation of this evening. We'll invite Amanda Rogers, Manager of Harm Reduction Services, HIV/AIDS Regional Services, Ashley O'Brien, Manager of the Integrated Care Hub, and Justin Isaac, Consumption Treatment Services Coordinator, HIV/AIDS Regional Services, to appear before council to speak to Clause 3 of Report Number 29 received from the CAO with respect to the Integrated Care Hub Extension and Social Services Relief Fund Phase 2 holdback. There we go. We have you guys on the screen. Thanks very much. You have the floor.
Good evening, Your Worship and council members. Thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to provide you with an update on the Integrated Care Hub. It feels like it was just yesterday we were getting ready for our very first delegation to bring forward a proposal and ask for your support on a much needed service in our community. One that our people deserve, one that has been missing for far too long, and one that would save the lives of the most vulnerable yet valuable citizens in our community. Since opening the doors of the ICH at the end of July, the hub has averaged 100 to 150 visits each day. Over 150 meals are served daily thanks to our partnerships with Loving Hands, Lionhearts, Community Friends in Motion, and other generous community partners. As of February 16th, 2021, 295 unique individuals have accessed the rest zone. In fact, most days the rest zone has been at capacity. Rest zone services are now offered around the clock, which allows us to increase our capacity and acts as a critical means for stabilization, particularly for individuals who are engaged in substance use and are at high risk of overdose. Through our drop-in and rest zone, we provide a safe, secure space supported by caring staff to 20 to 45 people each night who otherwise would have nowhere else to go. We have engaged with many of the community's hidden homeless population and have been able to get many of them registered in the housing database. The structure of our services, providing basic needs and harm reduction support without the requirement that they be engaged in the housing system, has allowed the ICH to identify people who have previously been uncounted in formal homelessness statistics. Since the CTS is co-located with the ICH, we have seen over 100% increase in visits. In December and January, we saw more visits than any other 2 months in the history of the CTS. With the visits increasing, responses to overdoses have skyrocketed. The average cost of an overdose in the community is approximately $1,600, and when we respond, it alleviates this cost from our healthcare system, and we provide dignified care to people on site where they are most comfortable. In addition to harm reduction education and on-site service provision, each CTS client averages 2 referrals to additional health and social service agencies for ongoing community care, which includes opioid substitution therapies like methadone and Suboxone. It's evident that this partnership works. In December 2020, 26 new people accessed the CTS, which is 3 more than the total unique individuals that were accessing CTS during the peak of our provincial COVID lockdown. Finally, the objective of an integrated care model is to coordinate services from various agencies, making them more accessible to those who need them. We're pleased to report that more community partners continue to contribute to the work of the ICH, including Providence Care, Addiction Mental Health Services, Home-Based Housing, the Youth Shelter, Detox, Kingston Health Sciences Center, Kingston Police, the United Way, Street Health Center, and emergency services such as paramedics and the fire department. It's no secret that we're experiencing an epidemic of drug poisoning. We are faced with this opioid catastrophe every single day, and we have become first responders in this work to keep people alive. The CTS has responded and reversed more overdoses in January 2021 than they did in all of 2018 and 2019 combined. In Kingston, we experienced a 21.5% higher rate of opioid-related overdoses than the provincial average. I'm sure you can imagine that this work really is heartbreaking at times. But thanks to the work of the ICH team, including our community partners, people are being diverted from the emergency room and from police custody. But more importantly, people are alive, so they have the opportunity for recovery in the future. Preventing people from dying isn't enough, though. In order to achieve recovery, people need to experience meaningful connection, belonging, and community. The people we serve experience significant systemic violence, and we provide them a space where they belong and are free of judgment. One of our core pillars is stabilization. Sleep hygiene, nutritious food, receiving access to primary care, and being supported by people who believe in you are key in promoting mental health recovery. But we want to move beyond stabilization to get people to a place of readiness should they choose to access more stable housing or other services. We believe in providing people opportunities to develop self-worth through teaching life skills. An example of how we do this is through our community support program, currently funded by the United Way, where to date, over 25 of the people we serve are meaningfully engaged through employment opportunities within the Integrated Care Hub. They receive equitable compensation to give back to their own community and are encouraged to support and take care of each other. Additionally, we have successfully employed 3 individuals who were previously accessing our services at Artillery Park who are now officially on payroll and who bring invaluable expertise to our team. While we continue to learn, grow, and build relationships with community partners and the people we serve, we know the need is so great. It exceeds our capacity to meet it. So the need to continue to support this program until longer-term funding is secured is absolutely critical. Without it, many of the people we serve who suffer the deepest and use substances simply to feel well will lose their lives. In closing, again, we would like to thank you so much for your continued support, and we look forward to answering any questions that you have.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councilor Hutchison.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple of questions from the report. It's stated here that ongoing drug poisoning and opioid crisis, which I think we'd all agree is going on, is even more apparent due to the pandemic. I was wondering if you could further elaborate on that and why that is the case. Why is it more obvious?
Just like our chronic homelessness issue, it's kind of been on the forefront with the lack of services being accessed. Also, believe it or not, you can like contribute some of the peaks and overdoses to people being able to access CERB, people being taken out of their regular communities, housed in motels and things like that, away from their supports, as well as there's actually been like a struggle in regards to the trafficking of supplies. So there was a period of time in the summer where we saw a substantial increase in fentanyl use that was coming across the border because of the lack of crystal methamphetamine use able to get across the border. So there's many factors that contribute to why it's more evident than ever.
Great, thank you. It says later in the report that 25 individuals at night, you have 25 individuals in the resting area and 20 in the drop-in for a total of 45 per night, which is good. So how many individuals do you think would use the space if more space was available? And behind that is I often hear that the ICH is not big enough to do the job. And so I'm wondering how you would respond to that. You can see my line of questioning here.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. That's a great question. And I think, you know, our space is never going to be big enough. We certainly have a very large homelessness population, a chronic homelessness population within our community. But I think just as many, you know, the unique reasons why people are homeless and the needs that they have are just as unique as the individuals themselves. So although the integrated care hub is serving our largest homeless population currently right now, I do believe that it is important to understand that the homeless population does have unique needs. And I'm not sure the integrated care hub would certainly be the best fit to serve the entire population of people who are experiencing homelessness within our community at this time.
And why is that?
Well, there are many people within our community that have varying needs. So we have a large veteran population of people. We have a senior population of people who are experiencing homelessness. We have some people within our community who choose to actually just stay outside. They're more comfortable staying outside. And I think the unique aspect to our program is that we have created a program that has been geared to meet the needs of people who are experiencing complex concurrent disorders. So we're serving people who have historically within our community not been, who have been underserved because they have very challenging behavioral needs that accompany their mental health and substance use challenges. So for some people, our service might not fit their needs, which is why I think it's important within our homelessness system that we have options for people who are experiencing homelessness so they can choose where they're most, they feel the most safe and comfortable.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Susan,
So,
you want to get two questions?
yeah, just two questions for delegations.
Okay.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, your worship. I think it's a sad, I'm not going to comment. I'll ask a question first instead. Are there, just listening to what you're saying about the complex nature of homelessness we have, and you described a variety of segmented groups with the military veterans and other homeless people as well, some that don't have a codependency on drugs or a mental illness and have that combination. And so those people who are not drug dependent but are very much outside of that scope, is there an opportunity for them to stay at the shelter, or do they feel at risk from the other behaviors of the people who may have drug addiction issues? And would you recommend perhaps, so that's my question, but then would you recommend maybe having a separate drop-in center that helps those types of people who don't really fit in with the same population setting that would be utilizing the integrated hub?
That's a great question, Councillor Chappelle. Thank you. I think the Integrated Care Hub, one of our core philosophies and our values are underpinned and rooted in meaningful connection, belonging, and community. So I think the Integrated Care Hub is well known for caring and supportive staff and being extremely welcoming in our services. So we can certainly serve anyone, but I think it's important to note that within our shelter system, we do actually currently still have capacity. We also have another adult shelter and an overflow shelter who are not always at capacity within the shelter, within the system right now.
Okay. And I guess my second question really relates to the technology that's being deployed on sampling narcotics being utilized by patrons of the ICE Integrated Health Center. I'm just wondering how that test pilot is going and if you've had any positive feedback. Have you saved lives just because there's been a dosed substance that is not safe?
Yeah, so we're obviously with any new program, and the population that we work with is quite untrusting. So we're having to build, that trust with individuals that are coming into the space, and which is going quite well. And we've had people willingly offer and test their substances. The beautiful part about that is that they're doing it in a safe space where also if they choose to use that substance, knowing what's in it, that they know if there is an adverse event like an overdose, that we are going to respond and care for them to the best of our ability. So yeah, we've had feedback for sure. We, for example, had a dose tested last week that we believe was actually carfentanil. The person still chose to use the substance, but cut that dose that they were going to use by almost a quarter of what they were going to previously use.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I'm out of questions.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, last night was a really awful night. It was it was below -15, and tonight probably the same. Then it warms up. Did you notice a difference last night? Like for the some of your clients who don't usually stay the night, did they stay the night last night? Did they use the resting area? Did you notice a difference?
Yeah, we were at full capacity last night. We often have a fire outside to make sure people are warm. We prioritize ensuring that we always have warm clothing and blankets for people, but we were at full capacity last night. We're able to shelter 45 individuals. I think too, the beauty with having other shelters in the Kingston community is that when we are at capacity, because we've built such good relationships with our other shelter systems, we're actually able to refer people to other shelters if we are at capacity and provide them free transportation so they have a warm space to be for the night.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose tonight might be the same way because it's still so cold outside.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, thank you very much, Ashley and Amanda and Justine for your time tonight.
So much. Take care.
Take care.
Okay, so with that, we have no further delegations this evening. So we'll move on. We have no briefings. Are there any petitions to present? Councillor Chappelle.
Sorry, am I on mute? Am I off mute now? There's got to be a simpler way to get through this generation of you're on mute. Anyways, to your
We can
worship,
hear you.
I appreciate the opportunity to present a petition. This petition is to the mayor and city council. And this is actually a very unique petition because I have to read it because that'll explain what it's about. There's 76 individual names who are residing in the Kingston area. We, the undersigned, identify as experiencing homelessness. We cannot add our addresses to a petition because we do not have one. But we attest to the fact that we're currently doing our best to survive in the city of Kingston boundaries. We are cold and exhausted and desperately need your help. we request of the City of Kingston to immediately open an overnight warming center to help prevent avoidable deaths and injuries. We also request that the City of Kingston work with us to provide safe, clean housing where people with income from Ontario Works, Ontario Disability Support Program, or with no income at all can thrive. We understand this petition will be shared through city documents and online, and our friends and family and the public may see it. And so this has been presented by a group of people experiencing homelessness in Kingston and supported by 2 residents who helped coordinate this, Crystal Wilson and Latata Flett. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other petitions to present? Okay, seeing none, we have no motions of congratulations, recognition, sympathy, or speedy recovery. We have no deferred motions, so we will move on to reports. First up, we have report number 28 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Stroud, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that report number 28 from the Chief Administrative Officer, consent, be received and adopted.
Okay, so there are 4 clauses. We're going to separate clause number 2 for Councillor Holland's pecuniary interest. Are there any other separations? Councillor Stanek?
Separating report number 1, please.
So that's clause number 1. Okay, seeing no other, yes, Councillor Doherty?
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember the clause number. It was the funding, the emergency funding clause. Which one is that?
The emergency funding clause, I believe, is in the recommend report.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, thanks,
Okay.
sorry.
Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, I'd also like to speak to clause number 1. Thank you.
So what we'll do is we will first deal with the unseparated clauses. They are clause 3 and clause 4. Clause 3, renaming the Planning Advisory Working Group, and clause 4, traffic bylaw minor amendments. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. So now we'll circle back to clause number 1, renewal of the service level agreement between the City of Kingston and Sustainable Kingston Corporation. Councillor Stanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have one question, and it's Sustainable Kingston in recent years has always run Pitch in Kingston every April, coinciding usually with Earth Day. And last April, because of COVID, we couldn't have it. There were talks last year that maybe we'd be able to have something in the fall, but COVID, was still creating shutdowns. I didn't really see it meant, well, actually this report tonight is just a recap of 2020. So my question to staff is, does it look like we could have some form of Pitch in Kingston this year in 2021? Picking up garbage can be kind of a solo act, right? It's just you and a garbage bag. So even if we still have restrictions, we are in the green. If we can stay in the green, can we have some form of Pitch in Kingston, to keep on top of the litter that's in the suburbs on the side of roadways?
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the question. And yes, certainly Sustainable Kingston right now is working with the public health and with Public Works actually for a pitch in event. It will not be Pitch in Canada because they have canceled the event again this year, but they're looking at some kind of event throughout maybe a month where individuals can go and register to pick up through different neighborhoods.
Okay, super, thank you.
Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. My question really relates to the expanding enterprise of the environmental office within, or the climate change office within the City of Kingston. I'm wondering how much of the efforts and work that was previously done by Sustainable Kingston is now being done in-house within the City of Kingston. I'm wondering if their budget is still required to be as much as $90,000 a year.
Commissioner Hugebos or Ms. Salterkeep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So Thank you, Councillor Chappelle. So the city has always had a role in the past several years on our climate change portfolio, ranging from investments in electric vehicles to, before that, crafting the community and corporate climate action plans. And I'd say the actual supporting funding going to Sustainable Kingston has been reduced over the last couple of years. And this level of funding for the service level agreement is reflected in the approved 2021 budget. I say there are a very good role for Sustainable Kingston to play out in the community, and whether it's advocacy for climate change to supporting businesses to groups and other activities like Pitching Kingston, like Councillor Stanek raised. Whereas the city's focus with our expertise in programs such as the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program and a Green Standard Community Improvement Plan. These are things that the city does need to lead, is appropriate for the city to lead, whereas there are other things that Sustainable Kingston is doing a great job of leading on behalf of us in the community.
Okay. Seeing no other comments or questions, we'll call the vote on clause 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Now I'll move to clause number 2, Queen's University Kingston main campus. We will call the vote. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Doherty, did you want to speak to it? Go ahead.
Thanks, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So the report states that consultation with Heritage Kingston is not required at this stage, but at the same time, it also mentions that staff are revising and updating lists of character defining elements, and there are several properties which are currently not captured. So I don't understand, if that's the case, why Heritage Kingston would not be consulted. I wonder if staff could speak to that and explain it.
Who speak to that? Yes, Mr. McLeod.
The obligation to consult with Heritage Kingston in an easement agreement is at the outset when the terms are set. In this case, this is a continuation of the same agreement that's been in place for, I believe, now 22 years. So the terms and the conditions that apply between Queens and the city for heritage easement purposes and heritage regulation purposes continue to be the same as they've been in place. When the new document is developed, it will be processed in the manner that a new one would be processed and go through the committee. But at this time, nothing is changing in substance.
Right. So when the report mentions that we're changing, perhaps revising and updating characters, and that some properties aren't already part of the agreement, what you're saying is we're not necessarily adding other properties that haven't gone through a Heritage Kingston. We're not necessarily adding properties.
Not through this stage, correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we will call the vote then on clause 2. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to report number 29 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that report number 29 from the Chief Administrative Officer recommend be received and adopted clause by clause.
Okay, clause number 1, request for exemption from section 45 1-3 of the Planning Act as it relates to a minor variance application for the lands known municipally as 809 Development Drive. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Number 2, taxi commission and rideshare regulation harmonization. Councillor Neal.
Yes, thank you very much. For all of the newer members of council, I'm totally supporting this because we've had, for those of us that have been on a few more years, there have been occasions when we've received hundreds and hundreds of emails from every Uber driver from across Canada trying to convince the city to create and overrule the taxi commission on certain issues. And I think having a bylaw in collaboration with the taxi commission makes sense. The taxi commission has some very good safety rules, such as police checks of drivers, which I'm not, unless they've changed their ways, I'm not sure Uber does. There's also other issues at work as well, such as appropriate insurance. And I think it's really, really important that we create a level playing field. And yes, rideshare has become the way of the world these days, but we should make sure that our citizens are as well protected if they take an Uber drive as they would be if they took a taxi ride. So I will be supporting this, and hopefully we'll get that level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Stroud.
Before I speak to the recommendation, I'd like to just give a historical observation of why we are here. So if you'll recall, when taxis started over 100 years ago in larger cities, in Kingston, the average citizen couldn't afford a vehicle. And so a taxi was, you hired it when you needed it, and that was it. We're in the opposite situation now, where we actually have too many vehicles in society, more vehicles than we need. 96% of the time they sit parked. The average vehicle is parked 96% of its lifetime. And so it actually really supports the business model of the rideshare, which is to use private vehicles that would otherwise be idle to give people rides for money. So the competition vis-a-vis traditional taxis has always favored ride sharing because of where we are historically. And add to that the fact that there was no regulation, you can see that this is not an even fight. We talk about fairness. I don't think that's the primary directive here for us as City Council, is to make something that's fair. If that was the way we looked at things, we wouldn't have homeless people. So I think what we ought to do is consider whether the city should be taking a primary role in this regulatory process. And so is the question to each of us, do we agree with regulation of rideshare for safety reasons or so on, like Councilor Neal suggests? I think the answer is obvious, of course we do. But do we think that the city of Kingston should be the one writing those regulations in consultation with our neighbor, because there's no point in doing bylaws in this municipality if there's vehicles crossing the boundary from other municipalities. So that's why we've got Loyalist involved, but really this is a provincial matter. So so we might end up doing a lot of work on this and then find that the provincial laws change. So I'd like to ask the CAO a question about what kind of resources she is what she has in mind, what kind of resources will be involved in this drafting of the bylaws. Are we talking about significant use of city resources for this?
CAO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So we are looking at primarily my office, so some support from my office. There is a project manager that would support some of this work, as well as the acting city solicitor's time. We do have a number of best practices already compiled, Councillor Stroud. So we made reference to a number of other municipalities in the staff report that have already passed those types of bylaws, and we would be looking to those as best practices to move forward.
Okay, so I take from your answer that it's not starting absolutely in blue sky, because you've got these other municipalities that have already done some things that we can draw on, and that we don't really have to reinvent the wheel. Therefore, the resource allocation required on our end is not enormous, but it still is a major undertaking. And I guess I'd like to hear from you, is this something that will affect the other work that we're doing? Because in my mind, the work on the zoning bylaw update and things like that is far more important. So I'm wondering if that's going to affect any of this other important policy work that the staff is doing.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So to respond to your question, Councillor Strout, no, it won't. The work is not going to be led by the planning services. So I just want to be clear, it's primarily going to be through the CAO's office with the legal services. There will be some involvement, obviously, from bylaw enforcement, but planning services will not be involved in this particular bylaw.
Okay, well, I will, with reservation, support this recommendation. I do think that it may be a waste of time, but also Uber may maintain control over the situation and not resist entering into any agreements, as we saw to some respect with the Airbnb and the regulation of short-term rentals. But we'll see what happens here, and I will reluctantly support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I just, maybe Councillor Stroud was not aware, but there is a letter on file that came in the addendum from Uber. And it seems to me that they're more than interested in working with the city. So my question is really about, as this process moves forward, will the city be reaching out to the author of that letter that was presented by Uber and try to find some common ground to see if we can make a resolution sooner? It seems that they have lots of ideas in their letter, including even rural busing. So can you comment on that, Ms. Hurdle?
Mr. McLeod.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I too have been involved with discussions with legal counsel from Uber over the years. I've been involved with the Taxi Commission in their previous effort to create a bylaw at their end for this. So these are areas where we're very familiar with the system that we're being asked to implement, so that I don't anticipate there being any surprises, in that we've had, both through the Taxi Commission and ourselves, a very open discussion. The opportunity here is to create a harmonized process that includes both the municipalities as well as the Taxi Commission, to make sure the right parties are the ones involved in which aspect of the overall regulation, to make sure we have a safe and fair system that works within the community.
Okay, so my question was, will anyone be reaching out to the person who submitted the letter from Uber?
Certainly, we will be in discussions with Uber Canada throughout this, as we have been before this part.
Okay. Thank you. Next is Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, just to answer some of Councillor Chappelle's questions, that as the council member on the Taxi Commission, I can assure you that actually Uber has reached out to us as well. They have spoken to the chair, and I've had a conversation with them as well. And the CEO Hurdle and our solicitor met with the Taxi Commission. So a lot of conversations have taken place since last year. And we're actually really pleased that we've arrived at this stage, because I think now we're potentially going to arrive at a solution, because in fact the province hasn't decided to this stage to step up and regulate the rideshare companies. But the fact is that municipalities have actually stepped up, and a lot of municipalities in Ontario. So we're just one of many municipalities that are heading in this direction. Thanks.
Okay, is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Okay, we will call the vote then on clause 2. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to clause 3, Integrated Care Hub Extension and Social Services Relief Fund Phase 2 holdback. Are there any questions? Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I do support the recommendation. I appreciate how staff have put lighting all around the neighborhood. That lighting is really bright. It looks really good. And I'm sure that it's appreciated by the residents. The fencing, there's fencing going up. I just wondered if staff could say what the status of the fencing is. We had a snowstorm late yesterday afternoon. Is the fencing, did that delay the fencing? Is the fencing going to be up by Friday or was it up today?
Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I can speak that yesterday we had snowplow going in to clear some of the snow to set the path for where the fencing was going. And I haven't got an update today, unfortunately for you, but I can tell you that the latest news I got, which was early this morning, was the plan was still to have it completed by the end of this week.
Okay, thank you very much. My only concern with where the ICH is you know, security for the residents. And so in the report tonight, it talks about, we have the temporary fencing going up, but also the introduction of additional walkabout patrols in the neighborhood that will occur throughout the days and nights, 7 days a week. So I just wondered if Commissioner Joyce could maybe talk more about that introduction of the walkabouts.
Mr. Joyce.
Sure, and thank you, and through you, Mayor Patterson. Yes, Councillor Osanek, you're quite right. We are introducing these, and they've actually started. What we've essentially stated is that there needs to be a minimum of 4 patrols of the neighborhood per shift, and the shift is an 8-hour shift. So the expectation is, and what they've been directed to do is actually patrol both along Montreal Street and along Rideau Street, roughly along Montreal Street, through the back way, along the Bell Park Drive there, down to the entrance and back up along the front of Montreal Street, and then down Rideau Street and sort of past the last house that's past the car wash, roughly 1,000 feet or so, and then come back up on the KMP trail and through that area. So to do that circuit, a minimum of 4 times per shift, and that's to happen every day, every night throughout the week.
Okay, thank you. And my last question concerning that through you, Your Worship, is when they do the patrols, do you think it'll be possible that the security personnel could keep a log of what they see on the patrol? Or the time that they do the patrols, just keep some sort of logbook?
Yes, thank you, and through you, Your Worship. They are actually keeping a log now. They started that. And so they're logging the time when they start the patrol, then they're logging when they end the patrol, and then if there's any incidents, that would get logged as well. So that is happening today.
Super. That will be very helpful, I think, and give confidence to the residents that you know, these additional security measures are going to take place then. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Oh, yes, Councillor Ostroff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Patterson. And I'm just wondering, maybe I should know this, but so we'll probably approve the extension to the end of the year. what's the ultimate plan? Like, why wouldn't it be a longer term? Because we're going to have to keep renewing it unless we had another location. So I just wonder about the thinking behind the short term. Well, this is a 10-month or whatever extension. So is it always open to another location? Is this a trial until something else comes along, or what? Because we're investing so much in that property. I just wonder what the thinking is behind the scenes.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you, Councillor Osterhoff, for that question. I think it's a very important one. So the reason why it's being proposed to be extended temporarily is because the city does not have, at this point, funding to secure permanent operations. So the dollars that are being recommended are really not going into the property itself, they're going into the operations. So all the supports to staff and making sure that we can provide the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week service. As you know, the issue is that it does cost a lot of money. We recognize that, and there are significant health components to this, mental health and addictions, for example. So we are working with our partners behind the scenes to try to secure some more permanent funding with some support from the provincial level. So those are conversations that are currently taking place.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Patterson. One more question. Yeah, thank you for that. That helps. I guess I kind of know that too, but are we learning? Are we learning about that funding? I know we are always in contact, but are other communities experiencing successes, and I guess whatever other communities might get? I mean, this is a large scale problem nationally as well, and with many incredible people doing so much work, and then municipalities having to manage this, and I'm really thankful that we're doing as much as we are. But are we connected and doing the things with the right levels of government? Are they coming to the table as well?
So
Can
I'll start, Councillor Osterhoff, and I'll probably pass it on to staff. So the answer is yes, there are discussions that we are having with the provincial government. We made permanent funding of the Integrated Care Hub a key part of our provincial budget submission from the City of Kingston, asking for that permanent funding. I think we recognize how important it is. And so that continues to be a high priority, certainly for myself, my office, and for senior staff to be able to have those connections and conversations, and pulling in other community partners that I think also see the value of this, to make this really a community ask. So there's definitely work that's ongoing. So happy to pass it on to the CEO Hurdle or Mr. Nordgraf for the additional info.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll get started, and Director Nordgraf might want to add to my comments. So we are working obviously on trying to secure additional funding. I do want to point out to council that the funding that's been utilized so far, and that's being recommended tonight to be utilized for these operations is all provincial funding coming from different sources. But we recognize that that's not permanent. So we are working on trying to find those more longer term or permanent solutions options.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next is Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the opportunity to address this question. I had received a number of emails, and there's a lot, it seems to be conflicting information with respect to what's in the report and then what is in reality. Everything from privacy screening on fencing, and I've gone over to the site and I agreed with the residents that privacy screening is only on one side, not on three, etc. But what was concerning to me was some of the guidelines that were mentioned in the federal government guidelines, that this facility should not be near daycares or parks, and where it's located is in fact on a parkway. So I am somewhat relieved that it is a temporary measure, although it's only pinned to funding. I do think a more permanent location should that's more suitable should be located. And I'm wondering if there's been an ongoing search for an alternate location, or is the city bent on having this location should funding be made available?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you, Councillor Chappelle, for the question. The reference to the Health Canada guideline is actually for the consumption treatment services, which are operated by Kingston Community Health Centres and would operate even if the integrated care hub had to close for whatever reason due to funding whatsoever. The consumption treatment services are funded separately, and they're funded directly to the Kingston Community Health Centre. So that's where, for example, we have the partnership with Spectra Plasmonics that we talked about earlier. So that would still carry on regardless of what happens to the operations of the integrated care hub, because it was operating before we established the integrated care hub. But we decided to bring the two together because we have a lot of clientele that actually use both services. So it made sense. As far as your, and I should add that Health Canada has reviewed the current location and has approved it. So it obviously met their criteria. So as far as other location, you probably have noticed in the staff report on page 10 and 11 of the staff report that there was a long list of locations that we have been looking at since this past summer. It is a challenging situation because we understand that there are so many elements at play here in terms of residential, schools, not necessarily in the current neighborhood, but any neighborhood where it may be located. And it has to have obviously access to transit. So thinking of something that's remote is not going to work. It has to be centrally located. So there are a number of criteria that we did list in the report, and that we looked at all these locations. And this was the one that met the most criteria, although not perfect, because I don't honestly believe that there is this perfect location in the city. And if someone knows where that is, I would be happy to hear about it. But it has, it's been quite the process and review in terms of the number of locations we've looked at, properties. And even more recently, if you look at page 11 of 18, there is a list that, we've worked with realtors to look at options and possibilities. So we are still looking, but we recognize that not many properties will be meeting as many criteria as what has been identified to serve the population that we're working with.
So ultimately, you're looking at this being a long-term event, a service being provided should funding be made available. So with that in mind, will the actual costs be presented in such a way that it's clear and concise to how much it would cost and how much that would be to the taxpayer if we are looking to maybe support this locally rather than based on provincial funding? Will that come out in a future report to know exactly how much it would be to as an impact on taxes for the residents of Kingston?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Chappelle, absolutely. If this service was to continue long-term, we would definitely report back to council with what the funding would look like. We know that the city on its own cannot support the service on an ongoing basis. Based on the numbers that we have now that we've been in operations for a number of months, we have a much better understanding of the actual costs. And we know it's not realistic for the municipality to be able to take this on its own. And that's the reason why we're having these conversations with our community partners that do receive, in some cases, provincial funding. And we recognize that there is a significant healthcare aspect to this service that we're offering at the integrated care hub. So that's also quite important and critical that it be integrated. But yes, we would bring back to council clear information on anticipated costs as well as a maximum contribution and the financing of that contribution. And we would look at this in the context as well of our shelter system and how this fits with the broader shelter services.
Okay, thank you. My final question is actually for His Worship. He presented tonight that this is one of the priorities that he's presented to the government of Ontario. And I'm just wondering, what are the other priorities he also mentioned in those meetings?
Thank you, Councillor Chappelle. I'll be brief just to stay within the scope of the item that's before us. But certainly a request for continued emergency funding where needed to get through the other side of the pandemic. Certainly for social service funding, safe restart funding is required for municipal services because our transit and other city services have not gone back to normal, so to speak. And then also joining with voices like the Chamber of Commerce, for example, on continuing to ask for the appropriate avenues to support businesses through this tough time as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I wanted to thank staff. I asked for a number of things over the last several months, one of which was that they continue the search for an alternative location, and that is answered in the report. Clearly that was done. And I also asked that, I also pointed out that, this is a service that is really citywide and addressing a need that's there in the city, and that we would have the funding in the budget, including the funding for security. And so it's strongly felt, and that also was addressed. And I want to thank staff for the security measures they have put in, which was mentioned by Councillor Sanik, the fencing, the lighting, and certain security measures. This district of Kingstown, which is my district, and it's located, the ICH is located there, is still, as the report acknowledges, experiencing disturbance and difficulties on the security front. And they're basically, those residents in that neighborhood are, as I've said before, taking the hit for the rest of the city. And with that in mind, I do see that other security measures are forthcoming, including the fencing, which is getting done within the framework indicated by Commissioner Joyce, and that the patrols will start. There have been problems with that, and I've been asking for them for 3 or 4 months, and the staff have expressed their frustration with getting it done in an expeditious manner. So I do have an amendment regarding that, since we don't know whether these security measures will do the job, will do the work that's needed. And I can read it, but there it is right there. I'll read it as people read it. That staff be directed to report back in May 2021 on details of measures taken to assist in the safety and security of the surrounding neighborhood of the integrated care hub, including a summary of the patrols undertaken of the neighborhood.
That's interesting. I'll just jump in for a moment.
Sure.
So with the motion to amend presented, so it's moved by yourself, seconded by Councillor Stanek. So what I'll do now is I'll start the clock again, so you can speak now to the amendment, and then
Sure.
we'll comments on there. So go ahead and feel free to add anything additional before I look to other speakers.
Okay. So the experience of the residents is that, there have been people with trespassing with weapons, thefts, fires, quite a few fires actually. And this is all acknowledged by staff in the report, which was good to see. And I appreciated, I think, in the neighborhood, but also with the councillors that I've been in touch with, that these are serious problems, and the city is trying to address them. So this is to assure, in the sense that this does happen. I don't doubt that so much as we need to have a report to see what the nature of the incidents, circumstances that are met when carrying out these patrols. And hopefully there'll be a log of those patrols, and that's where the summary will come from of what is experienced during these patrols. And then we'll have a much better idea about what's going on. Hopefully the other security measures will not make it will mitigate as well. So I'm asking council to support this amendment so that we'll get a report and we'll have better information in May 21. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody that wishes to speak to the amendment? Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I actually had this question, a question related to patrolling, so I'll bring it up now since it's referenced in the amendment. And also because it would be nice to know what is meant by that in the amendment. So Commissioner Joyce, in response to Councillor Sanek's question, I believe mentioned that the frequency of patrols, though I wasn't entirely clear on so when there was discussion of logbook previously, it made me think, are the patrols to go and observe and take notes, or is there sort of a constant engagement between bylaw and residents at the integrated care hub? I mean, of course, if there's a bylaw, if there's a problem with regards to a bylaw happening in the moment of the patrol, I can understand that, but I'm just wondering about the kinds of interactions, the frequency of interactions, and then to Councillor Hutchison's amendment, whether this amendment would increase surveillance in a sort of would there be any incentive to go and record activity or engage with residents for the sake of adding information to this request or fulfilling an objective that's being put forward?
Commissioner Joyce.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. So let me start probably by stating that the patrols are right now intended to try to mitigate bad behaviors that are happening in the neighborhood and to try to reduce those incidences that are occurring and somehow placate some of the neighbors' concerns with that. So not only will the security patrol go and document, but they will actually intervene in those situations. And I do have a few further plans that I intend to implement there that will further that, because fundamentally what is really required there is more engagement with the neighbors, to listen to them, to hear them, to understand the concerns, as well as engagement with some of the clients. And the idea will be to beef up that sort of the people that are doing those patrols, that they would have some knowledge of the client. So for instance, if they're patrolling at 3 o'clock in the morning and they see someone they recognize, they might be able to identify whether that person is harmless and they're not going to break in, they're not going to trespass, they're fine, they're walking on the trail, no concerns, versus another person that they may know is a bad actor and may intervene to make sure that they're not going to do anything that we don't want them to do. So while right now, using the security officers that we have in place will fulfill one aspect, there needs to be much more done in that regard to really try to address the underlying situation. And that's the plan going forward, is try to address that in a more wholesome manner, as opposed to the sort of simple approach of having someone just walk around. because I'm not sure that really gets to what we really need there on a more systemic basis. So it isn't just to do the documentation at all. The full intent will be that there will be much more engagement, much more intervention, much more prevention to try to stop the behaviors that are occurring. And it's not, most of the behaviors, I mean, judging by what I've seen on the police reports, there isn't violent calls or calls to the police or anything like that are happening so much, other than a fight perhaps between two clients. But there isn't violence to any of the residents that's occurring. I think more it's just we're getting, the issues of trespass and concerns about behaviors, erratic behaviors, and those kind of things. So it will be to try to address those. The bylaw are called out if we need them to be called out, same as they will call out Kingston Police if they need to escalate it or if they're unable to de-escalate it. Same way right now they call out the ICH staff in a lot of cases to de-escalate the situations because they're much better at dealing with their clientele and have a better means to de-escalate those situations. So it's really trying to expand on that as much as possible to address the situation.
Okay, thanks. So then, I don't know, I'm not sure if I was clear or whether it was in the amendment or not, but just a question of clarity then. So the people who are patrolling are our bylaw staff? No, they are staff, or city staff? Okay.
No.
If you
No,
could
sorry.
tell me, that would be great.
Sorry, it's a third-party security service.
Right. Okay. So, what level of oversight do we have then on things like their training and, ability to select individual to our needs, essentially?
So, through you, Your Worship, the third-party security company, they are trained security personnel to deal with de-escalation, those kind of things. Their training, as far as it goes with respect to this specific clientele, is not as solid as it would be for staff that are hired by the ICH management, I would say. So there is an intention to supplement that with staff that are more robustly trained in their clientele. That helps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, no, I'm happy. I'll just say I'm happy to support this amendment. I think more information on all of this, all of these activities would be helpful for all of council. So thank you, Councillor Hutchison, for bringing it forward.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the amendment? Okay, Councillor Stroud.
There we go. Can we have the amendment back on the screen, please? There we go. Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted.
Okay. Councillor Hutchison, you have the last word on the amendment.
Oh, okay. I'm not muted. So thank you for those questions from particularly Councillor Holland. I should have, it was my oversight to not mention that my focus has been on the security of the residents in many ways, but I'm also a firm believer in the work and the role of the ICH And I think after many conversations with Commissioner Joyce and emails that in reams, I'm glad he indicated that what we're both talking about is patrols that involve de-escalation and engagement. And that is why I think he wants to follow up on a plan to have the ICH hire their own, since it's all coming out of the same pot anyway, and in terms of funding. So I just wanted to make that clear. I support the role of the ICH. I've had issues, of course, with the location, and but I don't see that anybody has an alternative. That's a big problem we have to deal with. So, but on this motion, I think it's just a matter of trying to protect and enhance the neighborhood, given the role that is going on there. So if people support it, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. So we'll call the vote then on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. So now we're back to the recommendation as amended. Councillor Hutchison, you still have 2 minutes on the clock if there's anything else you wanted to add. You are on mute, Councillor Hutchison.
I was, and then I wasn't. So, yeah, just a couple of, a question about, is December the 31st sort of a drop dead date in terms of funding? I mean, the staff has been very clear, we can't afford to do this ourselves. It is a health issue, mental and physical and drug related, and it's a housing issue of which, you know, it seems the province should be taking leadership on. So what is the function after this, if this extension is granted?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you, Councillor Hutchison, for this question. We are, of course, working with our community partners to try to find a way to maintain this service in the longer term. But in order to do that, we do need some other sources of funding that we currently do not have. So the recommendation in front of council does speak to using up to 1.1 million from the social services reserve, should we need to. Ideally, we wouldn't need to pull that money from the social services reserve, and we would be able to access other sources of funding instead, which we've also built in our recommendation, that should other sources of funding become available, those would be drawn from first. That would be at the provincial, coming from the provincial government. We are trying to ensure that we can maintain this service. We understand that if this particular service is not there, people will still need to have somewhere to go. And we know that many individuals accessing the ICH would not necessarily access the traditional shelter system because they have more probably criteria which would make it very, very difficult for a number of those clients to access the shelter system. And we heard that, if you recall, during the summer, as we were working through our engagement and consultation with individuals that were at Bell Park. I'm not saying by any means that the ICH is the answer for everybody. We heard that today as well, that people need to have other options. And that's why we do have other shelters in the community as well. And we look at, of course, housing first always as an option. And we're going to be bringing forward some recommendations around supportive housing in the near future. So it's all of those that I think build the overall system. And that's why we're working to try to maintain this service beyond December. But in order to do that, it will need to come with other funding from other sources that are not the municipal government.
Thank you. One question, which I was going to ask of the ICH staff, but maybe staff has the answer, maybe not. It's indicated on page 93 of 130 for tonight that 35 individuals were connected to housing services, which would be great. Okay, that sort of thing. I think we'd all agree to that. Since moving to 661 Montreal. So do we have any insights why those individuals have been able to connect to housing services as versus the 86.2% who attending the drop-in do not have, those people don't have housing. So by my very rough calculation based on the numbers that were there, that would be like 181 people. So we placed 35, and this is not a criticism. I'm asking for characteristics or information that would tell us, why are we able to place some and not all, aside from the usual condition that some people don't want to be in the shelter system.
Mr. Ruff?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Patterson. So yeah, that's a great question, and we certainly have heard, and definitely the ICH staff would have a better answer than I would have at this point. But we're certainly seeing a very big variety of clients and client needs, and where they are on their stabilization pathway. So it really depends on kind of where clients are and when they are ready to access services such as Housing First or other services. And you've heard from the delegation that there are certainly clients that are really at this point kind of not there yet and really need to stabilize. Again, we've been at 661 Montreal now for about 4 months, and there's certainly still a lot of work being done on further establishing those pathways and those next steps for clients. Again, we have been updating council on a weekly basis in council updates on shelter stats and data. So we're happy to continue to provide you with some of that information and the various referrals that we are making to for clients. As you might have seen in the appendix as well of the council reports, the ICH staff have done a really incredible job in mapping the various referrals, and you will see some really incredible stats on hospital diversion and other kind of keys as well. So it's definitely a work in progress. Again, I cannot speak for every client at ICH, but there's, again, a different pathway for every client that accesses ICH. Thank you.
Thank you. I would appreciate getting that information. And just because it's good to be educated on what's actually happening. And I think that's my time, right?
It sure is. That's perfect.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, next is Deputy Mayor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a question that is, I will allow you to be as detailed as you'd like, but I guess it could be a long response. So the question is regarding the homelessness system review, and I understand that this report touches on so many different things, but given that it is in the report, I wondered if you could perhaps provide an overview of the review. Is it mandated, for example? What is the timeline? What does the engagement process look like? That would be wonderful. Thank you, Mayor Patterson. I will try to be brief. That is an excellent question, and as CAO Hurdle pointed out, it's definitely an important piece of the bigger, longer-term piece of the system, because it is really about how the different components work together. So where we are now with the process, we actually have gathered a lot of information through various engagements. So we had some support from a consultant to do engagement with the current system, with clients. We have obviously also done engagements ourselves when we were at Bell Park last year. There is another research that we're actually just receiving in draft that we're happy to share with council as well around homelessness in Kingston. So there's a lot of different information that we've gathered.
We also have obviously, and I just want to point out to council as well, that the system review is touching on the full scope of the system. So of course, we will be looking at the shelter beds, which is obviously between home-based housing and from the cold Lily's Place, the youth shelter. But we're also looking at services such as street outreach, the prevention diversion program, Housing First, our discretionary residency benefits. And we are also looking at kind of the transitional and supportive housing piece, and again, how that works together. So what we are aiming for is to have, have a review of kind of all the different components of the system, the cost per unit, the outcomes, the accountability for all of those pieces. And we're aiming to have a report to council by the end of Q2 that would basically spell out kind of I would say the next steps in the system and how we would like to procure moving forward that system. We have existing agreements with our providers that ends in 2021 as well. So this is a really good time to do the review. And again, we obviously have been learning a lot through the pandemic, but even prior to the pandemic, of what works, because we also have a lot of components of the system that are actually quite successful. Again, Housing First, for instance, has been really successful in housing people. I should add to that as well, that this is not mandatory. There's no provincial, ask to do a review. This is really based on our own staff, obviously initiative, and clearly because of the things that we've been learning over the last couple of years with the system. The other components that I will touch on is the encampments guidelines, or the encampments components. So again, there obviously is also the request from council to come back with an encampment guideline or encampment strategy. Again, that ties into the homelessness system review, but we're hoping to bring that forward to council before we are bringing the full system review, because we recognize that that is also a time sensitive piece that we're working on. Again, I know I can talk about a lot of other components, but in a nutshell, yes, we're making good progress. We're using a lot of different pieces of information, and we will be back with a comprehensive review and a recommendation on next steps by the end of Q2.
Okay, great. So then another sort of two-part question, engagement, through you, I have time. So if someone wants to be involved, it's not mandated, it's being guided by city staff, not the province. So then are we going about the consultation the way we would normally with any other city initiative as the first part? And the second part is, if someone is interested in feeding into the shelter review, what do they do?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Patterson, absolutely, we are open. We would like to hear from everybody. There are no, I don't think we want to set any rules around if and how people can engage. Again, we have used various ways of engaging with clients that are currently in the system, with community members. We have a separate advisory committee, and we have Councillor Dorothy actually sitting on that committee. But it's made up with members of various community agencies. But I recognize that we want to hear from as many voices as possible to hear what works, what doesn't work. And we obviously have heard from a lot of people already, but would always welcome that for sure.
Right. Thank you. And then just one more comment. So I think another thing I just want to end on and draw council's attention to, and I think Councillor Hutchison touched on this as well, and others have, that of course we recognize the nature of the jurisdictional situation. The majority of the services being offered at ICH are provincially funded, but also a lot of health care services, serious health needs in the community that are being met there. also, of all the different sort of conflicting issues that are creating the situation that we are trying to address at the Integrated Care Hub, I would say the top three would be the pandemic, the opioid epidemic, and our housing crisis. And so two of those three are public health situations. I will just remind all of council, prior to all of this, about a year or so ago, the province was very interested in reducing the role of public health, and that has not changed. You might think, given the pandemic and what we've been living through, that the status and the priority of public health in the province has changed. There is still the potential to reorganize and diminish the capacity, or at least increase the amount of funding of it provided from the municipality to public health. So I just wanted to mention that because we're seeing the effects of public health crises in the city. And the third issue, of course, is housing. And I don't want us to lose sight of that. We know this is a temporary situation. We really are hoping that we're doing the best in the near term, but in the longer term, there's a lot we have to do to address the needs, the supportive housing needs in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Okay, we will call the vote then on clause 3. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to clause 4, financial support program overviews. Okay, we will, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question about the funds for the 200,000 towards art groups. And I just wonder if unincorporated like nonprofits or small art groups have the opportunity to also apply for this funding, the groups that have limited capacity to often access other funding because they're unincorporated.
Who from staff can take that question?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Commissioner Hugo Boss, go ahead.
Hi. Sorry, there's no video. I have Director Wigington on the call, but I think he's struggling maybe to answer. He does have his hand up now, Mayor Patterson.
Okay.
So
Mr. Wigington, go ahead.
There he is.
Sorry for the technical difficulty. The raise hand function has moved to a different part of the screen. We are, in answer to that question through you, Your Worship, following the guidelines that already exist within the administration plan as approved by Council for CCAF funds. So for the ADAPT grants that are available as proposed to individual artists, but also collectives, ad hoc groups, and nonprofit arts organizations, they would be eligible to apply according to the eligibility requirements previously set out in the City of Kingston Arts Fund.
Thank you.
Okay, we will call the vote then on clause 4. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to report 30 from Planning Committee.
Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that report number 30 from the Planning Committee be received and adopted.
There's just the one clause, approval of an application for zoning bylaw amendment 872 Johnson Street. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to report number 31 from Heritage Kingston.
Moved by Councillor Osterhoff, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that report number 31 from Heritage Kingston be received and adopted.
Okay, so we have a couple of applications under clause 1. Unless anyone would like any of them separated, we will vote on them as a whole. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to report number 32 from Environment, Infrastructure, and Transportation Policies Committee.
Moved by Councillor Stroud, seconded by Councillor Neal, that report number 32 from the Environment, Infrastructure, and Transportation Policies Committee be received and adopted.
There is just the one clause review of Quiet Streets Pilot Initiative. Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted just a question to staff for clarification for the members of the public that may be watching that missed the committee meeting. Could staff explain how what form this this may take in future years? This Quiet Streets that we saw last year. What form might it take in future years on the ground? Give us, if you can draw us a bit of a picture of what stuff, what it means that it's incorporated as a regular program in the community-based initiatives.
Mr. Semple.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. So the intent is that as part of the traffic calming policy update that's coming, there will be some community-based initiatives or ways in which the community can be involved in transportation matters in their neighborhood. So this is one of the examples of the types of programs or initiatives that could be included as part of this traffic calming update. So the intent of the Quiet Street pieces to be included with that is that the implementation that that we saw this summer, where blocks or several blocks were coupled together for a route along Earl Street and along Mack Street. A similar type of program would be available to interested community members who are looking at local traffic or ways in which they can affect some transportation change or information on their block. So we need to do some work on our side as it relates to what that equipment or the implementation would look like at the block level. But the intent is to have it available as one of the tools that could exist from some of those community initiatives that could exist.
Yes, so and there was some discussion at committee in the different forms, the sort of successes and challenges of the chosen barriers and different sort of physical presence of the pilot project, and what other things may be used in the future. But is it fair to say that any future efforts of this nature would have a slightly or significantly different look?
Through you, Your Worship, I think that that remains to be seen. I think that what we saw and what KCAT shared as part of their experience with the program was that there were challenges that were faced in the day-to-day operation in maintaining the setup that was employed this past summer. And I'm not saying that in a critical way. I think that's somewhat to be expected when you're testing out a program, especially a program that came together so quickly. So part of what they shared back with us, and part of the city's observations as well, is that there needs to be something that that sort of delineated the street and indicated to those using the street, sort of the intent of what was going on there, but that it also was constructed in a way or installed in a way that did not require as much sort of oversight or daily adjustments. So we're looking at ways, sort of with the tools that we have and the ways that exist for us to sign that and manage that as part of our normal traffic control pieces. But we're also looking at the ways that the other cities have done it in Ontario and in other parts of Canada about the types of equipment they used and any challenges they had. From the municipalities we talked to in preparing the report, there were similar challenges faced in those communities as well, with sort of movement of the temporary features, requiring a lot more sort of involvement day to day than I think had been anticipated. So we don't know exactly what that final implementation looks like, but addressing those concerns, I think, is the primary intent of what we want.
Thank you, Mr. Semple. Yeah, so I'll just use the rest of my time for a quick comment. As far as the permanence of the installations and the daily maintenance required, I know exactly what was going on for the sections that were in my district, like Earl Street, and then the section that turned up towards Victoria Park. Because in my first election campaign, I had those little blue signs, and a little blue sign is an installation on someone's lawn that can be picked up by anyone and moved, stolen, destroyed, whatever. And that's what happened. It happened in certain areas of my district, and I was aware of it because I was replacing these signs on a daily basis, very similar to what was happening with the temporary quiet streets installations. They were being moved, they were being destroyed, they were being removed altogether, and requiring daily monitoring and maintenance. So what I did was, with my second campaign, is I did not seek and I did not grant sign locations in a certain area where I had seen this problem before. And that is the same area that the Quiet Streets pilot, from my observation, had big problems. In other words, there's areas of the city in my district where nothing will last on the street. So unless it's made of something that you can't lift and move and mess with. So something like the Jersey barriers downtown that were used in the Love Kingston Marketplace, that is too heavy for you to be lifted as a joke or a prank or anything like that. So you can't. So that's more permanent. So I would expect something of that nature. So if you want to do physical presence in the streets to show the changes of the street, it needs to be something much more durable than what was used last time. I think that's what we agreed at committee as well, and that's what the community members were saying. And I just don't want to add my observation that that is consistent with what happened with my election signs, and therefore, it's a very predictable predicament to be in, and I hope staff takes that into consideration for those areas of the city where that vandalism tends to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will call the vote then on clause 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have nothing from committee of the whole. We have no information reports from members of council, no miscellaneous business. So we will move on to new motions. We have one new motion. It's moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that the city's commemoration policy requirements be waived in order to allow room at the Kingston Police Station to be dedicated to Bill Hackett. Councillor McLaren, you have the floor.
Thank you. So this motion came as a result of talking to police staff. They seem, or many of them seem to be very much in favor of recognizing Bill Hackett and in a way that would be fitting. And one of the things that came up as we were discussing this is that we have an unnamed boardroom in the new police station. And it seemed to be a very good way to recognize one of the longest serving police officers in our history. And I mean, he joined the police force in 1951, and he served for almost 44 years of service. That's pretty much unheard of. And he's, in addition to his police service, he's also been incredibly involved in the community on a level far exceeding the average person, and even exceptional people, for example, are involved in our community. It's part of what we do as public service. But he was on a different level, and he did this for many years in addition to serving on the police. So for 30 years, he served as a church athletic league as coach, conveyor, and director. He raised money to build the Harold Harvey Arena in 1950. For 15 years, he was a coach and a league organizer with the Men's Recreational Millers Hockey League. He was on the board of directors of and manager of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, board of directors of the local youth diversion program. He operated Christmas Child and Christmas Children's Kingston Regional Cancer Center and the Salvation Army, Ontario Eastern Division Celebrity Day campaign. And he was personally a very giving man. He donated his own personal money on many of these occasions as well. And for that reason, we feel that there's just so much we can. He's the kind of man we want to emulate, and that's what the kind of things that commemorations are for. So for those reasons, we felt that we have an unnamed boardroom. It seemed that the people there want it named after him, and he is a community hero. So it seems that this would be something we shouldn't need to wait for, and that's the purpose of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Okay, so we will call the vote then on new motion number 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on. Do we have any notices of motion? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Clerk, cross from minutes, please.
Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Holland, that the minutes of City Council meeting number 6-2021 held Tuesday, February 16th, 2021 be confirmed.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have some tabling of documents, a number of communications. Is there any other business? Clerk, cross for bylaws, please.
Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Holland, that bylaws 1 through 4 be given their first and second reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Holland, that clause 11.36 of bylaw number 2010-1 as amended be suspended for the purpose of giving bylaw 2 3 readings.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Holland, that bylaws 2 through 4 be given their third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Hill. All those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good evening.